everybody, to the Lenny and Elliott podcast. When Giants were Giants, we're going to be talking Super Bowl 21 New York Giants football with our co-host Leonard Marshall, two-time Super Bowl champion. I'm Elliott Kalb, Mr. Stats, and today, Leonard, we are joined by someone who has more rings than you. We are joined by your strength and conditioning coach, Johnny Parker. Johnny, hello. Thanks for joining us.
Elliott, thank you very much. I've been very fortunate in the rings category, but I'm nowhere near in Leonard's league in the money category.
Well, none of us can hope to be there.
As far as money from Leonard.
You're hot stuff, Johnny. You're hot stuff. Let me just say this. I am so honored and privileged and blessed to be sitting in the catbird seat I am, just as well as Johnny, for two boys from the South, one from Mississippi and the other one from Louisiana. I got to tell you, Johnny, we're in high cotton, brother.
We sure are. Mighty fortunate and mighty blessed. And Elliott, if I can, I'd just like to say this to just set the tone here, is that when Coach Parcells called and offered me the job, the strength coach of the Giants, I asked him for 2 days to make up my mind, because there was no guarantee that he was going to be there, even through the 84 season, much less a long-term run of success. Anyway, the first thing I did was call Leonard, and I said, Leonard, if I take this job, I don't know but one way to do this, and that's a hard, tough way. Now, these guys might run me back to Mississippi the first day, but if I've got one player that'll do what I ask him to do, then maybe we can get another one, and then another one, and maybe then we can get, nearly all of them. Leonard said, Coach, I will do anything you tell me to do. And for 9 years, that was the gospel truth. Leonard was a big reason why I was able then to get some other guys working out, and then more and more, and it kind of mushroomed. But were it not for Leonard, it wouldn't have happened. And I can never repay him that debt.
Now, for those of you, Leonard, let me get this right. Your history with Johnny was just that 1 year, your freshman year at LSU. Johnny, you were only at LSU 1 year before you moved on to Mississippi, your alma mater, correct?
Oh, Miss, that's correct. Yes,
so you had Leonard as a freshman at LSU, and Leonard, what did you see in Johnny? And Johnny, what did you see in Leonard that built that relationship?
Well, I saw a guy who commanded respect from every player at LSU, and that was from all the guys I worked with on the defensive side of the ball and all the guys I worked against on the offensive side of the ball. The two biggest things that happened for me when I joined LSU was there were three guys from Franklin High School that were playing at LSU in Lyman White, Greg Bowser, and Michael Johnson. And all three of those guys became Johnny Parker guys. And all three of those guys told me, Leonard, if you listen to Johnny, he'll get you bigger, faster, stronger, and he'll help you stay on the field and keep your behind out of trouble. And guess what? I adopted that right away. And our best defensive player, and Johnny will tell you this, was a guy who wore number 94 from Franklin High School by the name of Lyman White. And this guy could play sideline to sideline. And Johnny Parker was a guy who kept this guy healthy most of his career with LSU.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Leonard. I was, again, just lucky to be with some good kids that wanted to be great. And, a lot of guys can coach guys like y'all. I was just lucky to be the one.
Hey, Johnny, Leonard, Johnny, I know you were a history major at the University of Mississippi, and you've got to give me some of this history. Leonard alluded to the fact that two guys growing up in the South in the 1960s, I assume it was mostly segregated. Can you tell me a little bit about what life was like in the South in the 1960s?
All right. I'll gladly start with that, because I was so fortunate. And yes, it was segregated back then, completely segregated. But my daddy was a Methodist minister, and I don't remember when, but I can remember him telling me when I was very young. He said, who are you to say that you're any better than anybody else that God created? We're all children of God. And who are you to say that you might be any better or any more worthy than any of them? And this was a time when in our old town, if you were uptown grocery shopping or something, and a black person was headed in the one direction, you were headed in the other, they would actually get off the sidewalk and step down into the street to make way for the white person. Well, my daddy would have no part of that. He would step off the sidewalk into the street outside of them. He would not tolerate any 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 disrespect toward another person, toward another race. And I'm just so fortunate that he taught me that it's what's under the skin that counts.
The
That's
same
what
way that,
matters.
yep, the same way that happened for you, Johnny, it happened for me. My best friend growing up was a kid by the name of Michael Fletcher, who is an engineer who graduated from LSU and attended LSU at the same time I did to play football. And Michael and I were two kids that played every day, every time we could compete on a basketball court, on the baseball field, on the football field, anything we could do. But Michael was a better baseball player than any other sport because he was a skinny, really kid. But we would play basketball in his backyard from can't see to can't see, Johnny.
Yep.
And Michael's parents would bring me in the house and feed me lunch, feed me dinner, as we called it, supper.
Yep. Yeah.
Anytime, any day of the week, and I ate a little bit of everything back then. As you know, I never missed a meal, being the big guy I am. So, but when Michael and I got to fourth and fifth grade in school, things got a little crazy and they got a little hairy. And that's when the black kids couldn't use the same bathroom that the white kids used. They couldn't play with each other at recess. They couldn't do any of that stuff. And in 1967, 68, things began to change. And when they began to change, that's when I saw Michael say, "Hey, Leonard, you know what? It ain't going to be like that between you and me because that's not the way we've been raised." And that's what taught me to open up, reflect, and kind of understand that this thing is an attitude. It's a mentality. It's an attitude. Racism is taught. Racism is not something
Mm-hmm.
in the street. It's taught. And it's taught in the household, just like Johnny says. And I have never in my lifetime ever had anything ever happen to me in the South as bad as it happened to me here in New Jersey with what I call hidden racism. People that are taught that stuff, and you would hope that it wouldn't be like that, but it was. And the sad part was, it was when I was a man and not a boy.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Johnny, so you graduated college and you were a teacher. You wanted to become a teacher. How did you get into coaching?
Well, salaries in Mississippi are so low that men that teach usually have to coach too. But I had no interest, no desire to coach. And I can confidently say, Elliot, that one of uh, one of my two responsibilities my first year was as seventh and eighth grade girls basketball coaching. I can confidently say that I was the worst coach in the history of basketball. I, I will defend that title to the death. Our first game we got beat 51-9.
Oh, wow.
And the other coach pulled his starters at halftime. We played 4 6-minute quarters. So you do the math at that rate, he would have gotten over 100 on us. And we again, his starters didn't even play the second half. We They were shooting free throws, Elliot, and I substituted a little girl in the game, and she went in, stood right in front of the free throw shooter with her arms up. I mean, right in the free throw shooter's face, and the official had to tell her where to line up. So,
Oh my God.
and luckily, I mean, I couldn't have gotten any worse than I was at that. And fortunately, that year for me, I guess the one good thing that came out of that disaster as a coach and as a teacher was the little seventh grade girl changed the entire focus, direction, path, whatever you want to say, changed my life totally. So that was a good thing. My main contribution as a football coach that year, I was an assistant junior high coach, and I worked for a man named Charles Belapenny who had done this for years and years. He didn't need any help from me because that's good because I didn't have any help or knowledge to give him. My main function was as a finish line for sprints. So that was the illustrious beginning to my career.
How did you get into weight training?
And when um, at our old school, there were sometimes we'd have one coach, sometimes we'd have two. Well, my ninth grade year, we had two, and he and his wife lived in a teacher's apartment right across the street from the school. He had a set of weights in his backyard, and I was already a pretty much a physical, per- perfected, finished product. I was 5'11" and weighed 105. So I mean, I was pretty, rock. Actually, I was. I mean, you could read the newspaper through me,
Wow.
hold it up behind me, and still read it. Anyway, I needed help lifting the bar on most exercises, and that through weight training, I was able to become a decent high school player, not any better than that. And when I started coaching, I just thought, well, it had helped me a lot. It would help these kids too, and that was very true. It did.
I got a great question for you, Johnny. I got a great question for you. It goes back to our days at LSU. So, Elliott, back at LSU, when Johnny was my freshman coach, Johnny had some interesting techniques, some interesting products that he used, and he adopted something from a guy by the name of Louis Rickey.
Mm.
I don't think I remember this stuff because he and I talked all the time. I mean, I was his guy. He'd tell you I'd be in his office talking to him about conditioning. I'd be in his office talking to him about the game, and I had to talk to him about that crazy ass coach of mine, Lamar Leachman, who I damn near killed a few times in our meetings. But Louis Rickey, what impact did Louis Rickey have on your life, Johnny? And what could you share with us, with people that would want to follow and understand what Louis Rickey meant to your career, what he meant to all the athletes you trained and you taught and helped develop? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, first of all, Louis Rickey was from New Orleans, Leonard, and he was a weightlifter. He was the last or next to last American to set a world record in Olympic weightlifting. He at a body weight of 181. He snatched three and a quarter, which is not even you didn't even medal with that weight anymore. But his father owned a lumber company, and he worked after he graduated from LSU. He worked at the lumber company, and because he worked all the time, he couldn't go to the gym and work out with a bunch of guys, so he had to figure out a way to work out without spotters. And um, he and another man named John Gurgott developed a thing called a Mr. Alvin Roy, the pioneer of the profession, called it a sleeve rack. Most people call it a Ricky rack, and it is just like a sliding apparatus. It slides up and down on poles that are bolted into the ground and then into to a U and into the wall. And that's all he was a strength coach of the Steelers. And during that run of four Super Bowls in 6 years, that's all they used, their weight program. Just had these sleeve racks or Ricky racks. But he was so nice to me, so courteous, so patient. And I look back and I think of some of our conversations, and Leonard, I think he must have thought, God, this guy is stupid. Because I asked some of the dumbest questions, And yet he answered them just as though, that was a serious, thought provoking question. He treated me like I was somebody, even though I was just a podunk coach for a little podunk high school in Mississippi. And actually, a man who had perhaps the greatest influence on my career was Alvin Roy, who was from Baton Rouge, Leonard. And within a period of a few years, Mr. Roy introduced systematic, organized weight training for football into high school at Estruma in Baton Rouge, and into college at LSU, and into pro football with the San Diego Chargers.
He was the first, right? The first
He was the
strength.
first, and still in my mind the best.
So when you get interviewed by Bill Parcells, who has probably been given a good recommendation about you from his good friend Bob Knight, because you worked at Indiana with Bob Knight. Was there a strength and conditioning coach at the Giants in Leonard's first year? Did every team have a strength and conditioning coach in 1984?
No, more and more teams were going in that direction. But Leonard might remember this, that Lamar and Tom Bresnahan would kind of coach the off-season program. They were the offensive and defensive line coaches. And there was just a kind of a little area that they set aside for weights. But first of all, the program only lasted 6 weeks. And I remember when I was there observing, Tom was riding the bike and Lamar was Leonard, he was doing his own workout. And so, somebody that does this full time should know a little something that somebody that has to be a position coach, and with all the work that entails, I should be able to add something, to what they were doing with the players. So, Elliot, the weights that they had, they were not machines. That is, that they weren't exact. So I had to weigh all of the weights, and some of the 45s weighed as little as 36 pounds, and some weighed as much as 54. Now that's 18 pounds different if you're putting one of those on one end of your bar and another on the other end. The squat racks were so rickety, Leonard. I don't know how you were able to squat on them, because you could just take your hand and just shake them. They were that flimsy. So, but that's what we had. That's what we started with, and again, because of the support of Leonard initially, then Phil Sims was next. Then we were able to get more and more guys seeing the value of doing this.
That brings to mind the question. You mentioned the phone call with Leonard to get the job, and you hope that one guy would lead to another guy buying into another guy. I know from baseball players in that time, they didn't lift weights. They thought it would hurt them, actually, that there was more to be gained by not lifting and doing stretching and flexibility. I imagine in football, the linemen would all lift, but you inherited a Giants team. Let me go through some of these players. Lionel Manuel, 5'11", 175. Phil McConkey, 5'10", 170. Elvis Patterson was 5'11", 188. Stacy Robinson, 5'11", 186. 5'11", 180 for Herb Welch. Joe Morris was 5'7", 195. Obviously, there were did one size fit all in your training program? How did you do this when you came to the Giants?
That's a very good question, Elliot. There are certain common elements that need to be included in everybody's training, but then linemen need to become stronger, and they need to add muscle mass, and especially the giant linemen. Add muscle mass and become stronger. The skill guys needed to become more explosive. So they did in a set, they did fewer repetitions, and the emphasis was more on explosive exercises, where the linemen, the emphasis was on strength exercises. But really, there's not that great a difference. They all need to get stronger, more powerful, more mobile, more flexible. They all need those things, and they all need to run faster and jump higher. And you say, well, wait a minute, when does a lineman jump? He doesn't. But to jump higher, you have to put more force into the ground faster, and that's what they needed. So the difference, I think, a problem now is that strength coaches try to overthink this, and they try to turn it into rocket science when it's really not that complicated. Just think about what the the sport calls for. Think about what the position calls for. Then think about what the individual player needs, and then set his training program based on your answers to those questions.
I mean, you lasted more than 20 years in the NFL, and you were obviously so innovative. What's the story about you visiting Russia in the 1980s to consult with weightlifting experts? What did you pick up from those
A lot,
experiences?
a lot, and it was all topped off by a Russian coach who then immigrated to the United States later in the '80s, and it turns out he was right over on Staten Island. I just knew he was somewhere in North America. We didn't know where, and kept trying to find him, and it turns out he was almost a stone's throw away from us over there. And I've spent tons. I bet you I've got 10 legal pads of notes from that man, Gregory Goldstein. But in Russia, what we did, or the biggest thing I learned, was to have a long term plan, and then to fill in the steps of how to reach the goals that you want. And if I can just give this example, Louis Ricky told me that when he was actively training, that they would do a routine every time they worked out until it didn't work anymore. Because with sameness, your body adapts and quits changing. So so when that routine would quit working, he and his buddies would say, "Well, wait a minute, what do we do?" And one of the guys might say, "Hey, I had a lot of luck before doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's try that." And they would try it, and if it worked, they would keep doing it till it didn't work. If it didn't work, well, okay, we'll chalk that one up to experience. In Russia, they had a system and a plan that lent itself to long-term progress, and there was always an answer to what do I do next.
Let's get back to 1986 and that great Super Bowl run. The stars have to buy in, and I want to hear about Lawrence Taylor working with you. I mean, you won a ring in 2002 with Tampa Bay, where I bet the quarterback, Brad Johnson, was taller and heavier than linebacker Lawrence Taylor. Tell me about LT.
Okay, uh, first of all, this would be the first time in the lifetime of either one where Brad Johnson was compared physically in any way to Lawrence Taylor. So you've made history right there, Elliot.
All right, Drew Bledsoe. Let's go. You had Drew as well. You had a lot of great.
Uh, anyway, Lawrence was 6'3", would every Sunday would weigh within a pound or two of 248. And was he a diligent trainer? No, no. And I've told him in subsequent years, I've said, Lawrence, I owe you an apology because I should have just grabbed you and just said, hey, Lawrence, get your butt in there. We're going to do this. I should have done that and didn't. And I think Coach Parcells realized that he didn't expect enough of Lawrence, and he let Lawrence slide too much because in later years, Coach Parcells was demanding of everybody that they train, everybody. And He, I, I wish, in retrospect, I told Lawrence not long ago that if I had done a better job with him, he'd have set records that they would never touch. And you know what Lawrence said? He said, "Well, I did pretty good, though," which I think is a fair
He did.
understatement.
He did. But then there were probably guys that didn't have nearly the ability of Lawrence, and you were able to help push them to greater heights and achievements that they would never have been able to achieve, right?
Well,
I can tell you
I
one
don't
of
know
them.
about that.
I can tell you one of them. I can tell you
Let's
one of
hear it.
them. I think Joe Morris. I think you helped Joe Morris to become a beast.
Well, Joe needed guidance. It wasn't a matter of being willing or unwilling to work. He just needed to know what to do. He was a part of a great program at Syracuse, but with the Giants, there was no leadership, no direction, and so he just kind of, floundered a little bit. And Elliot, there comes a point when you're strong enough, and you need then to refine the strength. That is, especially for a running back, become more explosive. And I think if we helped Joe in any way, that might have been it. And Leonard did a full squat. I mean, with his butt to his heels, 620 pounds. Well, so did Joe. So did Joe. Of course, Joe didn't have as far to go from his to get all the way down in a squat as Leonard. But that just gives you an example of how powerful Joe was. And Leonard power cleaned 375. Joe cleaned 396. And
Fascinated by by the superstars. Tell me about Warren Sapp when you had Warren.
next question. I refuse to say anything, especially publicly, bad about any player that I ever coached. So I have nothing to say. I will tell you this. I will tell you this. Tampa Bay tried to hire Coach Parcells about 4 times. And during one of those times, he was, we were on the phone talking about, well, he's going to do this. We'll do that. Well, just kind of his general plan. And then he said, now this sap, we're going to give him a month to get on board. And if he doesn't, he's going. So that ought to tell you everything that you need to know. And you say, well, wait a minute, how can you get rid of a Hall of Fame player? Easy. It's very, very easy to do that when the player is really a detriment to your team rather than a help.
How about
Parcells,
Derek Brooks? Would Derek Brooks have fit right into the '86 Giants?
yes, he would. He was not the kind of player that we had on the '86 Giants. It was a different type of defense, but yes, he was a great kid, hard worker, very respectful. One time when I was very new there, uh, I wanted to show Derek a technique on an exercise that he do better. I said, "Hey, Derek, if you do this, I think you're going to like this a little better." Uh, and he said, "Oh, I should have got that." And I said, "No, Derek, I should have done a better job of teaching you." And he said, "No, sir. No, sir. You told me, and it's my job to get it. That's my fault."
Hey, Coach,
And I
let's
said,
talk about
"Hey,
something. Let's talk about something that we really should talk about and touch on a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about why the '86 Giants were so special. And in your eyesight, is your first of all, it was your first championship football team. Our defense was like a killer compared to
dominant,
the 85 Bears, the 84 49ers, the 83 Raiders, the 80, I don't know, what do you want to call it, the 82 Redskins or whatever. I tell people all the time, the Redskins were always good when there was a strike season. They never could compete, a full 16, 17 weeks and really come out on top as the team to be beaten or the team that was to be beaten. What made us so special, Johnny? Talk a little
Well,
bit.
I think there are a lot of things. One is leadership. And I'm talking about Mr. Mara and then to George Young and then especially to Coach Parcells. He had a certain type of player that he was looking for. His first year, he was 3-12-1, and they were going to get him. And he told me on my interview after that season, he said, last year I tried to be the head coach of the New York Giants. Well, that didn't work. This year I'm going to be Bill Parcells. And if they get me, they're going to get me doing it my way. And anyway, so I've heard him say this 100 times, Leonard, is that you got to have talent. But I'll take a little less talent to get the right kind of guy. And I think this is one thing. We had tough guys on both sides of the ball. Now, Elliot, you know that tough doesn't mean shoving after the play and trash talking and, or taking a swing at a guy, all that stuff. Got nothing to do with any of that. As a matter of fact, those are signs of lack of toughness. And they're signs of selfishness. We had tough guys, both sides of the ball. And Leonard, you could name them. This is, better than I could. But to be on that team, you had to be tough. And that meant practicing when you didn't feel like it, competing every Sunday. It meant always trying to win, taking care of yourself off the field, but then always carrying the fight to the other side, to the other team. Now, it wasn't that year. It might have been a year or two later. We're playing out in San Diego. And as Leonard will tell you, you weren't allowed to signal for a substitute to come in and get you because you were tired. You weren't allowed to do that. Well, anyway, after a play out there, Mark Bavaro was kind of staggering and he's waving, for a substitute. So we knew something was wrong. He gets to the sideline. Of course, the trainers and doctors are all there waiting on him. He just spits out a whole mouthful of blood. And the trainer said, Mark, what's wrong? He said, I thought my jaw was broke. Well, sure enough, they pulled back his lip, and there was a bone not showing, but actually completely sticking out his jaw. But our trainer, Ronnie Barnes, who's been there forever and is a wonderful person and trainer, Ronnie said, okay, we're going to take you to the x-ray room and just check everything out. And he said, stitch it up right here. And Ronnie said, hey, no, Mark, we'll get you to the, we just need to x-ray it. It's going to be okay. We'll get you back out of here. He said, I'm telling you, stitch it up right here, right now. So they did. And I think Mark missed maybe 3 or 4 plays. Now, when you got guys like that that are willing to make that physical sacrifice to win, or just because you don't want to let your team down, you got a chance to be really good. And then our quarterback was plenty tough too. He was very tough. Oh,
yeah.
And certainly we had talent, but we weren't going to, blow you away with our receivers. They weren't great. Mark Bavaro was the best receiver, and he was a tight end. We didn't throw it to Joe much or to Maurice Carthen. They weren't receiving threats. Yet, that Phil Simms, tell you, Leonard, did you ever feel like we were at a disadvantage when we were playing the Niners and they had Montana and we had Simms?
Never.
You think they had a big edge?
Never.
Never.
And I'll tell you why, because he was a tough SOB. Never.
Yes,
Never.
he was.
Never. And 7-7, our 7 against their 7, I take my 7 every day.
Every day.
All day. Every
Yep.
day, all day.
Yep. And just as an example, in the '86 playoff game where we beat the Niners 49-3, they're running. We have the ball down in their territory. They run a stunt, and their defensive tackle goes outside. The defensive end steps around. We don't pick it up, and he has a clear shot at Phil right in his face. Phil could see that, but it didn't. That didn't faze him. He just held the ball and then delivered touchdown pass. Well, the whole stadium is going nuts, and they didn't realize or didn't see it. Phil just got completely lit up. So he's kind of wobbling a little bit coming off the field, and his chin is just split wide open, wide open. And I get to him first, and say, Phil, what? He said, kind of got me that time, didn't he? That was his whole reaction. And he was not the most agile, and they would just knock the heck out of him. And he would, what he'd say? He'd be like, "Hey, don't you guys lift weights? Is that all you got? You can't hit any harder than that. I hit harder than that in practice." It just, he'd ridicule the other team. It would just break him in half. So I think, and of course you have to have talent, but we had toughness and we had leadership, and Coach Parcells wouldn't waver from his plan, and I think all of those things added up were reasons why we were exceptional.
Can't have a tough team without tough coaches. And Johnny,
Nope.
we want to thank you for joining us and spending some time with us this morning. What a marvelous team that was and sounds like. And I just get joy every time listening to you and your fellow teammates and coaches on that. And Leonard, another fine job. Thank you for leading us to your old coach.
You're quite welcome. And Johnny, I really sincerely wish you all the best, my friend. You know I'm always here. And thank you.
Thank you all very much. And by the way, if I can, just in closing, just say this: it's probably fate that you and Leonard teamed up, because you're known as Mr. Stats, and you might not know that Leonard is a big stat man as well. It's 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 40 million. And I'm talking about his pocket change. I'm not even talking about his account. But anyway,
when you're a brand ambassador for every product on the in the supermarket and then some, you get to accumulate, right?
And he deserves every penny that he gets.
Every penny. Okay, thank you, Johnny.